You know what, folks? I've been hauling freight across this great nation for over 20 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Blizzards in Montana that'll freeze your diesel solid in the tank, dust storms in Texas that turn day into night faster than you can say. 10-4, even had a black bear try to hitch a ride with me up in Colorado once, climbed right up on my running board while I was parked at a truck stop near Vail. But what happened to me last Tuesday on Route 66, just outside Flagstaff, Arizona? Well, that's something that's going to stick with me till the day I die and probably haunt my dreams for years to come. Hell, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and it's been a week since it happened. Now, before I get into this wild story, I gotta ask you something real important. Have you ever had one of those moments where reality just shifts? Where everything you thought you knew about the world gets turned upside down in the span of a few minutes? Where you start questioning if you're losing your mind or if maybe, just maybe, this world is a whole lot stranger than any of us ever imagined? Drop a comment below and tell me about it, because after what I'm about to share with you, I'm starting to think maybe we don't know this old world as well as we think we do. Maybe there's things happening out there on these lonely highways that would make Stephen King himself lose sleep and reach for a bottle of whiskey. My name's Joe Weisler, and I've been running the same route from Phoenix to Denver for the past 8 years. It's steady work, good pay, and it keeps me close enough to home to see my daughter Emma on weekends. She's 12 now and thinks her old man's just another boring trucker who smells like diesel and coffee. That Tuesday started like any other day in my ordinary, predictable life. I loaded up my Peterbilt 379 with a full trailer of solar panels heading to a new installation site up in Colorado. 48,000 pounds of clean energy technology, nothing fancy or dangerous, just another routine haul on America's most famous highway. I'd done this exact same run probably 300 times before. The morning was crystal clear, one of those perfect Arizona days where the sky stretches on forever like God's own blue canvas, and the San Francisco peaks stand out like they're painted on a postcard by some artist who's never seen anything but perfection. Temperature was sitting pretty at about 72 degrees, not a cloud in sight, light breeze coming from the west. I'd pulled out of Phoenix around 5 a.m. sharp, made good time through the desert, and was cruising through that beautiful stretch between Winona and Flagstaff, where the landscape starts changing from desert scrub to pine forests. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. Everything was exactly like it should be. I had absolutely no idea I was about to drive straight into the impossible. I was about 15 miles east of Flagstaff, doing a steady 65 in the right lane with my Jake brake humming that familiar tune that every trucker knows by heart, when I first noticed something was seriously off. The CB radio had gone dead quiet, and I mean cemetery at midnight, bottom of a well quiet. Channel 19 is usually buzzing with chatter 24/7, you know. Truckers talking about road conditions, smoky reports, complaining about dispatch giving them impossible deadlines, or just shooting the breeze about whatever's on their minds. Sports, politics, their wives, their rigs. But this morning, nothing but static, like every single driver on the highway had just vanished into thin air or been raptured up to heaven. I reached over and checked my radio, thinking maybe I'd accidentally switched channels or something had come loose during all the bouncing around on these rough roads. Breaker 19, this is Hammer Down Joe eastbound on the 66. Anybody got their ears on out there? I called out using my usual handle. Nothing. Not even a comeback from some bored driver looking to chat or complain about fuel prices. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and it was starting to make my skin crawl like ants were marching up and down my spine. But then I started noticing the other vehicles, or rather, the complete and total lack of them. For a Tuesday morning on Route 66, one of the busiest trucking corridors in the entire Southwest, the road was eerily empty. I hadn't seen another soul, not a car, not a truck, not even a motorcycle or RV, for the past 20 minutes, which is downright unnatural for this stretch of highway. Usually you got a steady stream of traffic heading both directions, tourists in RVs taking pictures of everything, locals commuting to work in Flagstaff, other truckers making their runs to Denver or Albuquerque, state troopers looking for speeders. But today, it was like I was driving through some kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland where everyone had just disappeared. The hair on the back of my neck started standing up. You know that feeling? Like when you're a kid, walking past a graveyard at dusk and you think something's watching you from behind the headstones, waiting for you to turn your back. My hands got a little sweaty on the steering wheel, and I found myself checking my mirrors more often than usual, half expecting to see something that shouldn't be there following me down this empty stretch of America's Mother Road. That's when I saw it up ahead, this massive crater right smack dab in the middle of the eastbound lanes. I'm talking huge, folks. Had to be at least 50 feet across, and God only knows how deep, like someone had detonated a bomb right in the heart of the highway. The asphalt around the edges was all buckled and twisted like something had punched up from underneath with the force of an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. Chunks of concrete and rebar were scattered everywhere like confetti after a demolition party, and the road just ended. Like someone had taken a giant ice cream scoop and carved out a perfect circle of highway, leaving nothing but this gaping wound in the earth. Steam was rising from the depths of that hole, creating these weird heat shimmer effects that made everything around it look like it was underwater or in some kind of dream sequence. The smell hit me next. Not the usual desert smell of sage and dust, but something metallic and sharp like copper pennies mixed with ozone after a lightning strike. But here's the part that really got my attention, the part that made me think I was either having a stroke or losing my damn mind. There were no construction signs anywhere. No orange cones, no flaggers directing traffic, no state highway department trucks, no nothing. Just this massive hole in one of America's most important highways, sitting there like it had always been part of the landscape. Any normal road crew would have had this thing blocked off for miles in both directions, with detour signs and traffic control and probably half the Arizona Department of Transportation crawling all over it like ants on a dropped ice cream cone. I started slowing down my rig, downshifting and letting the engine brake do most of the work, thinking maybe there'd been some kind of gas line explosion or massive sinkhole that had just happened. Maybe I was the first person to come across it, and I'd need to call it in to the authorities. But as I got closer, maybe 100 yards out, I could see two figures standing at the edge of this crater, just as calm as you please. At first, through the heat shimmer in my dirty windshield, I thought they were construction workers or maybe state troopers investigating the scene, trying to figure out what the hell had happened to their highway. But as my rig rolled closer and my eyes adjusted to what I was actually seeing, I realized these weren't people at all. They were seals. Two full-grown harbor seals, each one probably weighing 300 or 400 pounds, sitting upright on their flippers like a couple of tourists at the Grand Canyon, staring down into that hole like they were hypnotized by whatever was down there in the depths. Their whiskers were twitching in the desert breeze, and their big dark eyes were fixed on something deep in that crater that I couldn't see from my position on the highway. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a harbor seal in person, but they're ocean animals. They live in salt water, eat fish, hang out on rocky coastlines in places like California and Oregon. They sure as hell don't belong in the middle of the Arizona desert, sitting next to a mysterious crater on Route 66, like they're waiting for a bus. The nearest ocean is over 300 miles away, and these two were acting like they owned the place, completely unbothered by the fact that they were about as out of place as a snowball in hell. I pulled my rig over to the shoulder about 50 yards from the crater, set my air brakes with that familiar hiss, and just sat there for a minute, trying to process what I was looking at. My hands were shaking a little as I reached for my thermos of coffee, and I took a long sip of the lukewarm brew, hoping the caffeine would help clear my head and make sense of this impossible scene. Maybe I was having some kind of hallucination brought on by too many energy drinks and not enough sleep. Maybe the desert heat was getting to me, even though it was still early morning and relatively cool. But no matter how many times I blinked or rubbed my eyes, those seals were still there, still staring into that crater like they were watching the most fascinating movie ever made. One of them, the bigger one on the left, had these scars across his back that looked like they might have come from a shark attack or a boat propeller. The other one was smaller, sleeker, and kept making these soft barking sounds that carried across the desert air like some kind of ancient language I couldn't understand. I grabbed my CB radio and tried calling it in, even though I wasn't sure who the hell I was supposed to report something like this to. Breaker 19, this is Hammer Down Joe eastbound on Route 66 about 15 miles east of Flagstaff. I got a situation here that's gonna sound crazy, but I need someone to come take a look at this. There's a massive crater in the highway and, well, you're not gonna believe this part. I waited for a response, but the radio was still dead as a doornail. Not even static now. Just complete silence like the thing wasn't even plugged in. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I shut down my engine, grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket, and climbed down from the cab. The desert air hit me like a wall, dry and warm, with that metallic smell getting stronger as I walked toward the crater. My boots crunched on the scattered debris, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears like a bass drum at a rock concert. Every instinct I had was telling me to get back in my truck and find another route, but curiosity killed the cat, as they say, and I've always been too stubborn for my own good. As I got closer to those seals, they turned to look at me with those big, intelligent eyes, but they didn't seem afraid or aggressive. If anything, they looked expectant, like they'd been waiting for me to show up, like I was part of some plan I didn't understand. The bigger one made a low rumbling sound in his throat, almost like he was trying to communicate something important, and then both of them turned back to stare into the crater. It was like they were saying, "Come on, human. You need to see this too." I approached the edge of that hole with my heart hammering against my ribs, and what I saw down there in the depths made my knees go weak, and my mind struggled to accept what my eyes were telling me was real. What I saw down in that crater defied every law of physics and common sense I'd ever learned in my 40 years on this planet. The hole went down maybe 30 feet with smooth walls that looked like they'd been carved by some kind of precision tool, rather than blasted out by an explosion. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was what was at the bottom, glowing with this soft blue-white light that pulsed like a heartbeat, casting dancing shadows on the crater walls that moved in patterns that hurt my eyes to follow for too long. It was some kind of structure, folks. Not a rock formation or a piece of machinery that had fallen from a truck, but an actual structure that looked like it had been built by, well, I don't know what could have built something like that. It was geometric, all angles and curves that somehow flowed together in ways that made my brain itch just looking at them. The surface was smooth as glass but seemed to shift and ripple like liquid mercury when the light hit it, just right. And that light wasn't coming from any source I could identify. It was just emanating from the structure itself, like it was alive and breathing. The seals beside me were making these low, melodic sounds now, almost like they were singing or chanting. Their voices harmonized in a way that sent chills down my spine and made the hair on my arm stand up like I was in the middle of an electrical storm. I looked over at them, and I swear on my daughter's life, they looked back at me with understanding in their eyes. Not animal understanding, but human understanding, like they knew exactly what that thing was down there and why it was important. I pulled out my cell phone to take a picture, thinking nobody would ever believe this story without proof. But the screen was completely black. Not dead battery black, but like the phone had never existed black. I pressed the power button, held it down, tried everything I could think of, but it was like the device had been wiped clean of any ability to function. Same thing happened when I tried my backup camera from the truck. Completely dead, even though I'd charged it the night before. That's when I heard the voice. Not from the seals, not from another person, but from the structure itself. It was speaking directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely, and the words came through crystal clear in perfect English with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. Joseph Michael Weisler, it said, and hearing my full name spoken by something that shouldn't exist made my blood run cold. You have been chosen to witness this moment because your path intersects with ours at this precise point in time and space. I stumbled backward from the edge of the crater, my legs feeling like jelly, but I couldn't look away from that pulsing light. "What the hell are you?" I managed to croak out, my voice sounding small and scared in the vast desert silence. The seals turned to look at me again, and I could see something like sympathy in their expressions, like they understood how overwhelming this was for a simple truck driver who just wanted to deliver his load and get home to his daughter. "We are what you might call travelers," the voice continued, and I could feel it resonating in my chest cavity like standing too close to a massive subwoofer. "We have been journeying between worlds for longer than your species has existed, and this vessel has been dormant beneath your highway for 73 of your years. The seals you see are our ambassadors, you might say. They have been waiting here since the early hours of this morning, knowing that you would arrive at precisely this moment." I looked at those seals with new eyes, and suddenly their presence made a twisted kind of sense. They weren't just random marine animals that had somehow wandered into the Arizona desert. They were part of this, whatever this was. Guardians or guides or something else entirely. The bigger one with the scars barked once, a sharp sound that seemed to carry meaning, and the structure's light pulsed brighter in response. "Why me?" I asked, surprised that I was even able to form words. "I'm nobody special. I'm just a trucker trying to make a living and raise my kid. There's gotta be scientists or government people or somebody more important you should be talking to." My voice was getting stronger as the initial shock wore off, replaced by the kind of stubborn curiosity that had gotten me in trouble more times than I could count. The voice seemed to consider this for a moment, and I could feel something like amusement in its tone when it responded. "Importance is not measured by titles or degrees, Joseph. It is measured by the choices one makes when faced with the impossible. You stopped your vehicle. You approached despite your fear. You listened instead of fleeing. These are the qualities we seek in those we choose to contact." The smaller seal waddled closer to me, moving with surprising grace for such a bulky creature on dry land. It looked up at me with those dark, intelligent eyes and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed reassurance. I found myself reaching down to touch its head, and its fur was warm and dry, completely real under my calloused fingers. This wasn't a hallucination or a heat-induced mirage. This was actually happening. "What do you want from me?" I asked, directing the question toward the crater but keeping my hand on the seal's head for comfort. The contact seemed to help ground me, make this surreal situation feel more manageable. "I mean, I appreciate being chosen and all, but I got a schedule to keep and a boss who's gonna have my hide if I'm late with this delivery." The structure pulsed again, brighter this time, and I could see movement within its translucent walls. Shapes that might have been figures or might have been something else entirely, flowing and shifting like smoke in a gentle breeze. "We require nothing from you, Joseph, except that you remember this moment. Remember what you have seen here today. There will come a time, perhaps years from now, when this knowledge will be important, when others will need to hear your story and believe it." The voice paused, and I could feel something shifting in the air around us, like the pressure change you get before a thunderstorm rolls in. The seals both turned their attention back to the crater, and their barking became more urgent, more insistent. The structure's light began to pulse faster, and I could see cracks of brilliant white light spreading across its surface like a spider web made of pure energy. Something was happening down there, something big. "The time of dormancy is ending," the voice explained, and there was a note of what I can only describe as excitement in its mental tone. "This vessel has been recharging itself using the electromagnetic fields generated by your planet's core, drawing power through the natural ley lines that run beneath this ancient road. Your Route 66 was built along pathways that your ancestors knew were special, though they may not have understood why." I felt my knees buckle a little at that revelation. Route 66. America's mother road built on top of some kind of alien power grid? It sounded crazy, but then again, everything about this situation was crazy. I was standing in the middle of the Arizona desert talking to voices in my head while two seals acted as interpreters for an underground spaceship. Crazy was relative at this point. "How long have you been here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The implications were staggering. If this thing had been under the highway for 73 years, that meant it had been here since the late 1940s or early 1950s, right around the time Route 66 was being expanded and modernized. How many people had driven over this spot without knowing what was beneath their wheels? "We arrived during what you call the Roswell incident," the voice replied, and I felt my jaw drop open like a cartoon character. That event was a distraction, you might say. While your government and media focused their attention on New Mexico, we were able to establish ourselves here in Arizona without detection. The crash in Roswell was genuine, but it was not us. There are many travelers in this galaxy, Joseph, and not all of them are as careful as we try to be. The bigger seal with the scars suddenly stood up on its hind flippers and let out a long, mournful call that echoed across the desert like a foghorn. The sound sent chills down my spine and made me look around nervously, half expecting to see government helicopters or military vehicles converging on our position. But the highway remained empty, the desert silent except for the wind whistling through the scattered debris. "Your guardian is warning us that our time grows short," the voice explained. "The energy discharge from our awakening process will soon be detected by your planet's monitoring systems. Satellites will register the electromagnetic pulse. Seismographs will record the vibrations, and within hours this location will be swarming with investigators who are not ready for what they will find." I looked down at the smaller seal, who was still pressed against my leg like a loyal dog. "Guardian?" I asked. "You mean these seals are here to protect me?" The idea that these marine mammals had somehow been assigned as my personal bodyguards in this impossible situation was almost more unbelievable than the alien spaceship itself. Not to protect you, Joseph, but to guide you, the voice corrected gently. They will ensure that you leave this place safely, and that your memory of these events remains intact. There are forces on your world that would prefer this encounter never happened, that would go to great lengths to erase any evidence of our presence. The Guardians will help you resist those influences. As if on cue, both SEALs began moving away from the crater, waddling across the broken asphalt toward my truck with purpose and determination. They kept looking back at me expectantly, clearly wanting me to follow them. The structure's light was getting brighter and more intense, and I could feel heat radiating up from the depths of the crater, like standing too close to a bonfire. "Wait," I called out, suddenly desperate not to let this moment end. "I have so many questions. Where do you come from? Why are you here? What's going to happen next?" The words tumbled out of my mouth in a rush, and I realized that despite the fear and confusion, part of me didn't want this incredible experience to be over. How many people get the chance to make first contact with beings from another world? The answers to those questions will come in time, the voice replied, and I could sense a note of fondness in its mental tone, like a parent explaining something to a curious child. "For now, it is enough that you know we exist, that we have been watching and waiting, and that the time of hiding is nearly over. Your species stands at a crossroads, Joseph. The choices you make in the coming years will determine whether our next meeting is as friends or as something else entirely." The SEALs had reached my truck and were now barking urgently, their calls echoing off the metal sides of my trailer. The smaller one actually reared up and placed its flippers on my running board, looking back at me with an expression that clearly said, "Come on, human. We need to go now." I took one last look into the crater, trying to memorize every detail of the impossible structure below. The cracks of light had spread across its entire surface now, and it was beginning to rise, slowly lifting itself out of the hole like some kind of technological flower blooming in fast forward. The sight was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and I knew I was witnessing something that would change my understanding of the universe forever. "Remember, Joseph," the voice said as I reluctantly turned away from the crater and jogged toward my truck. "Remember everything. Write it down, tell others when the time is right, and when we return, as we surely will, help your people understand that we come not as conquerors but as neighbors who have been waiting a very long time to introduce ourselves properly." I climbed into my cab with shaking hands, the SEALs positioning themselves on either side of my truck like an honor guard. As I fired up the engine and put the rig in gear, I could see in my mirrors that the structure had fully emerged from the crater and was hovering about 10 feet above the highway, spinning slowly and casting rainbow patterns of light across the desert landscape. I pulled back onto Route 66 with my heart still hammering like a jackhammer, the SEALs keeping pace with my truck as I slowly accelerated. In my side mirrors, I watched that impossible craft continue to rise, its light growing brighter and more intense with each passing second. The whole desert behind me was lit up like the 4th of July, casting long shadows that danced and shifted as the structure rotated in the morning sky. Then, just as I was thinking this couldn't get any more surreal, the damn thing just vanished. Not flew away, not faded out, just gone in the blink of an eye like it had never existed at all. 1 second. It was there, spinning and glowing like a technological Christmas ornament. And the next second, there was nothing but empty blue sky and the sound of my diesel engine rumbling down the highway. But the SEALs were still there, still keeping pace with my rig at 65 miles per hour, which should have been impossible for marine mammals that were built for swimming, not running. They moved across the desert terrain like they were gliding on ice, their bulky bodies somehow defying gravity and physics as they flanked my truck like a couple of motorcycle escorts. I grabbed my CB radio again, and this time it crackled to life, with the familiar chatter of truckers going about their daily business. "Breaker 19, anybody see anything weird on the eastbound side near Flagstaff?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady and casual. "Maybe some kind of light show or construction activity?" "Negative on that, driver," came back a gravelly voice with a Texas accent. "Been running this stretch all morning, smooth sailing all the way. You feeling all right up there? You sound a little shook up." I looked in my mirrors again, but the crater was gone too. The highway stretched out behind me in perfect condition, like it had never been damaged at all. No broken asphalt, no scattered debris, no evidence that anything unusual had ever happened there. just smooth black pavement disappearing into the heat shimmer of the desert horizon. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied into the radio, though I was anything but fine. Must have been seeing things, too much coffee, not enough sleep, you know how it is. But even as I said it, I could see those seals in my peripheral vision, still running alongside my truck with their dark eyes, fixed on the road ahead like they were navigating by some internal compass. I couldn't understand. The next few miles passed in a blur of confusion and disbelief. Part of me was convinced I'd had some kind of breakdown, a stress-induced hallucination brought on by too many years of long-haul driving and not enough time with my family. But the seals were still there, still real, still keeping perfect pace with my 18-wheeler as we rolled through the Arizona landscape. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. I blinked, and the desert on either side of my truck was empty except for sagebrush and scattered rocks. No seals, no guardians, no evidence that any of this had ever happened, except for the memory burned into my brain like a brand. I pulled into the truck stop in Flagstaff about 20 minutes later, my hands still shaking as I parked between two other rigs and shut down my engine. The familiar sounds of diesel engines idling and air brakes hissing should have been comforting, should have helped ground me back in reality, but instead they just made the whole experience feel even more surreal. How could the world just go on like normal after what I'd witnessed? I climbed down from my cab and walked around my truck, checking every inch of it for some sign that what had happened was real. Scratches from the seal's claws maybe, or some kind of residue from that strange light. But my Peterbilt looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left Phoenix that morning. Clean, well-maintained, and completely ordinary. Inside the truck stop, I bought a cup of coffee and a notebook from the gift shop, then sat down in a corner booth and started writing. Every detail I could remember, every word that voice had spoken into my mind, every gesture the seals had made. I wrote for 2 hours straight, filling page after page with what sounded like the ravings of a madman even to me. But I knew it had happened. I could feel the truth of it in my bones, in the way my skin still tingled when I thought about that pulsing light, in the way my heart raced when I remembered the intelligence in those seals' eyes. This wasn't a hallucination or a breakdown. This was real, and I was probably the only person on Earth who knew about it. I tried calling my dispatcher to report a delay, but my phone was still completely dead. Not just the battery, the whole device seemed to have been wiped clean, like it had been hit by some kind of electromagnetic pulse. I had to use the payphone outside the truck stop, an ancient relic that somehow still worked in this digital age. "Joe, where the hell are you?" My dispatcher, Frank Martinez, barked into the phone. "Your GPS tracker went dark about an hour ago, and the customer's been calling asking about their delivery. You better not be taking one of your scenic detours again." "Sorry, Frank," I said, trying to sound normal. "Had some truck trouble, but I'm back on the road now, should be in Denver right on schedule." It wasn't exactly a lie. I had definitely experienced some kind of trouble, even if it wasn't mechanical. The rest of the drive to Denver passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by government agents or alien spacecraft, but by something more subtle. Birds seemed to follow my truck for longer than usual. Clouds formed patterns in the sky that looked almost like symbols. Even other drivers on the highway seemed to glance at me with more interest than normal, like they could sense that something had changed about me. I delivered my load of solar panels to the construction site outside Denver without any problems. But the whole time I was thinking about what that voice had told me. There will come a time when this knowledge will be important, when others will need to hear your story and believe it. When would that time come? How would I know? And who the hell was going to believe a story about talking spaceships and psychic seals on Route 66? The drive back to Phoenix 3 days later was when things started getting really weird, and I mean weird in a way that made the alien encounter seem almost normal by comparison. I was taking the same route naturally, Route 66, westbound through Flagstaff, and I was dreading passing that spot where the crater had been. Part of me was hoping to see some evidence that it had really happened. Maybe some residual damage to the highway or construction crews investigating unusual seismic activity. But another part of me was terrified that I'd see those seals again. Or worse, that I wouldn't see anything at all and would have to accept that I'd completely lost my mind. As I approached the area where the encounter had happened, I slowed down and kept my eyes peeled for any sign of disturbance. The highway looked perfect, like it had been freshly paved, but there was something else that made my blood run cold. There were other truckers pulled over on the shoulder, maybe 6 or 7 rigs, all parked in roughly the same spot where I'd stopped to investigate the crater. I pulled over behind them and climbed down from my cab, walking toward a group of drivers who were standing around talking in hushed, excited voices. I recognized a couple of them from previous runs: Bill Henderson, who hauled auto parts between Los Angeles and Dallas, and Maria Santos, one of the few female long-haul drivers I knew who specialized in oversized loads. "Hey, Joe," Bill called out when he saw me approaching. "You hear about what happened here yesterday? Craziest damn thing any of us ever seen." His face was pale, and his hands were shaking slightly as he lit up another cigarette. Bill was a 20-year veteran of the road, the kind of guy who'd seen everything and wasn't easily rattled. "What kind of thing?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the other drivers could hear it. Maria stepped forward, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "There was this hole, Joe, right in the middle of the highway, big enough to swallow a semi. But that's not the weird part. The weird part was the animals." She paused, looking around at the other drivers like she was checking to make sure they'd back up her story. "Animals," I prompted, though my mouth had gone dry as dust. "Seals," said another driver I didn't recognize, a young guy with a beard and a nervous laugh. "2 harbor seals just sitting there next to this crater like they owned the place. In the middle of the Arizona desert, can you believe that?" My CB radio went dead, my GPS stopped working, even my damn watch stopped ticking. Bill nodded vigorously. "Same thing happened to all of us. Every electronic device just went dark for about an hour. Then when everything came back online, the hole was gone and so were the seals. Highway looked like it had never been touched." He took a long drag from his cigarette and shook his head. 20 years I've been driving this route, and I ain't never seen nothing like it. I felt like I was going to throw up. It hadn't been a hallucination or a breakdown. Other people had seen it too, experienced the same impossible things I had. But that raised even more questions. Why had I been the only one to make contact with whatever was in that crater? Why had the voice spoken only to me? "Did any of you hear anything?" I asked carefully, not wanting to sound completely insane. "Like voices or sounds coming from the hole?" The group of drivers looked at each other with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern, and I could see them starting to wonder if I was having some kind of episode. "Just the seals barking," Maria said slowly. "Why, did you hear something else, Joe? You look like you've seen a ghost." She was studying my face with the sharp attention of someone who'd learned to read people during her years on the road. I realized I was at a crossroads. I could tell them the truth about what had happened to me, about the voice and the structure and the message I'd been given, but they'd probably think I was crazy. Or I could keep it to myself and let them think this was just some unexplained natural phenomenon or government experiment gone wrong. But then I remembered what the voice had told me. There will come a time when others will need to hear your story and believe it. Maybe this was that time. Maybe these drivers who had witnessed part of the impossible were the ones who needed to know the whole truth. "I was here 3 days ago," I said quietly, and the group fell silent. "I saw the same thing you did, but I also saw more. A lot more." I took a deep breath and started telling them everything, from the moment I first noticed the empty highway to the seals escorting me away from the crater. I told them about the voice, about the structure rising from the hole, about the message I'd been given to remember and share when the time was right. When I finished, the silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Some of the drivers were looking at me like I'd completely lost my mind, but others, Bill, Maria, and the young bearded guy, were nodding slowly, like pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. "That explains why the seals seemed so intelligent," Maria said finally. "They weren't just random animals, they were there for a purpose." She looked out across the desert, her expression thoughtful. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the old days, about spirits that would appear to travelers on the ancient trails. She said they were guardians, protectors of sacred places." Bill flicked his cigarette butt into the sand and shook his head in amazement. "So what you're saying is we've all been driving over some kind of alien base for years without knowing it, and now they're waking up?" The implications were staggering, and I could see him trying to wrap his head around it. "That's what they told me," I confirmed, "and they said there would be more contact in the future, that our species is at some kind of crossroads, and the choices we make will determine how that contact goes." The young driver with the beard laughed nervously. "Well, that's just great, no pressure or anything. But despite his joke, I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear I'd been carrying around for the past 3 days. As we stood there in the desert, sharing our impossible stories and trying to make sense of what we'd all witnessed, I realized that this was just the beginning. The voice had been right. The time of hiding was ending, and whether we were ready or not, humanity was about to discover that we weren't alone in the universe. And somehow, a group of truck drivers on Route 66 had become the first witnesses to that revelation.